We're now 3 weeks into the Archazia's Island metagame and the best decks are truly starting to settle. This is going to be a new series of videos for us where we take a look at the best decks at the biggest tournaments each week. And a quick shout out to say that all of this data is from Inkdex, so definitely check them out. And without further ado, let's take a look at the lists. So starting us off, let's take a quick look at the high level data. As I mentioned, we are going to be looking at the data from the biggest tournaments over this past weekend. We're looking at 5 here. So the first one is Charlie's Collectible Show. This was a 13,000k tournament and it featured 319 players in America. So it's absolutely huge. There was also a 1k at Safari Zone, also in America. And I believe it actually became a 3k in the end, and that featured 70 players. And then also Top Choice Gaming, which was a quad case tournament featuring 95 players once more in America. And then on the other side of the pond for us, we had 2 tournaments in Europe. The biggest one was the Rafle for the Law event. This was a 178 player event. And also Conflux Inkclash, a 74-player event in Belgium. What we're going to be looking at is the top 8 from each of those tournaments, so that's 40 decks in total. And as you can see, the deck that had the highest representation in terms of purely raw in combination was Sapphire Steel. There were 15 Sapphire Steel decks represented across those 40 decks. It's interesting to see Sapphire Steel, and we're going to take a deeper look at the lists. But there are kind of 2 main archetypes that we're seeing for Sapphire Steel. The first one is the item type build. We saw 7 of those. But then there's also the more aggro version, the Kiwi Birds version, as it may also be called. And we did see one Whole New World version make a top 8 as well. After that, it was unsurprisingly Ruby Sapphire with 13 decks overall. Ruby Sapphire a little bit more converged around that kind of item build, relying on tamatoa as the win condition. We saw 11 of those, and 2 with the more control version, and I'm kind of calling the control version the one that doesn't have as many tamatoas. It's more relying on things like Maui Shark. After that, we are seeing an Amethyst Steel. They had 3 decks overall, more the aggro kind of build. There were 3 Emerald Steel discards, 2 Ruby Sapphire mid-range versions of the deck. Quite interesting list, which we're going to look at. We've got 2 Amethyst Emerald, and rather than those kind of more tempo-oriented builds, these are more built around the discard archetype. And then finally, we saw 2 Amber Steel, more aggro decks rather than the traditional Steel Song. So from a high level, that's what we saw. Of course, that's a lot of Sapphire decks with a few other decks in the mix there, but Sapphire, particularly that Tamatoa, really starting to dominate the metagame. But let's take a look at some of the most interesting and also the best performing lists from each of those archetypes. So the first Sapphire Steel deck list we're going to look at is actually the deck that took first place at the Rafle tournament. This was by IKL Elgraboa, and this is very much what we've come to expect with these kind of item builds. We do have that big item package there, 4 popsicles, 4 photospheres, and then also adding in those extra 1-drop items such as the Last Cannon, the Shield of Arundel, to help you have more consistency to be able to get your bell out on turn 1. We see the Scrooge McDucks here, we see the Tamatoas. Interestingly, Hades is starting to make it back into these lists as just another form of removal. So in this list, they've opted not to have the Oswald, so taking out some of that high roll ability for probably a little bit more consistency. We also see only 1 copy of Let the Storm Rage On, so that's obviously not the main goal of this deck in terms of the kind of the control element. Instead, it's going to be about ramping with the T-pose, with the Fishbone Quills in order to get out to your later game pieces, being able to get that Hades down as a form of removal as well. But yeah, very standard looking Sapphire Steel list here. And again, did well, proves the consistency of this deck. And this is another Sapphire Steel deck that did well, more the item build again. And here we are, this is one using Oswald. So really trying to take advantage of Oswald, and because of that, we see a lot of items in this list, fewer characters. A little bit more consistency there on the control items, so things like Let the Storm Rage On, we see the full 4 copies there. Of course, the game plan is get Bell out on 1, and then start controlling your opponent's side of the board whilst you're gaining your advantage with Oswald. So this was a top 4 deck. And the last of the more item-heavy builds, also from Conflux Inkclash, this time it's from Metin Pamuk. This is a very, very interesting version of the list, which is kind of trying to do a lot of things. This player actually called it the toolbox list, and I think you can see why. It's got a lot of different things that can help you out in the different matches. Something like Grab Your Sword's not very useful into a Ruby Sapphire matchup, but really good into maybe a Sapphire Steel matchup. Arthur in there as well. They've got the 1 copy of Oswald, so that is an option if they're able to draw it. They've got the Chicha for some extra draw. But one thing that I really like about this list that I think is super interesting is Merlin's Carpet Bag. So that's another way to help you recur your items. So of course, with Bell, with Hiram Flavisham, you've got lots of items in there that you are going to be banishing. So if you're not able to find your tamatoas, then this is another way to help you get those back to get value out of them turn after turn. So very, very interesting list. Even 4 letter goes, it's just a build that we haven't seen. Obviously did well at this event, so be curious to see if anyone's taking any cues from this one. The other archetype we see in Sapphire Steel is very much this aggro version of the build, maybe more like a curve build where you're looking to play something strong on turn 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But this is looking like a very typical version of those. So Hook is actually quite notable. We haven't seen Hook really in these lists, but it makes sense to give you a board presence early on. Also, it's got great synergy with Smee. After that, we've got the standard things we'd see like Calhoun. We've got the Alice. Of course, this player only using 2 copies of Alice, but still her effect really powerful. It can protect your important characters like Tamatoa if you're able to get Alice down and then play Tamatoa afterwards. And of course, after that, much of the same of what we'd expect from a list like this. So another aggro list here, and this is Bell's Dwarfs by Irish Willie. This was a top 8 at the Charlie's Collectibles show, 13k, but it was actually the deck that had first place after Swiss, so that's something to note. But yeah, so this is still using that same kind of philosophy, the very much aggro version. This is looking a lot like a Diggy Diggy Hole list, for those who remember that. That's the Amethyst Steel aggro list, with things like Happy and Doc and the 7 Dwarfs Mine Train. What's notable about this is we don't have Hiram Flavisham, so really the draw is coming through those Popsicles, the Photospheres, and the Docks. And then after that, we've got things like Lawrence, who's a great body to have on the board. But we've also got Baymax, who's able to heal damaged characters to gain lore. So an alternate way there to generate some lore in a deck like this, I think is very cool. Great to see Miss Bianca here. This is a card that's really starting to pop up in Amber Steel, but being able to play her on 4, you've got plenty of allies in this deck. So very, very interesting build. I'll be curious to see if people kind of start experimenting more with the Mine Trains version and kind of making it more Diggy Diggy Hole-esque, or whether people will eventually settle more back on the McDuck manner, or maybe there'll be something in between. And finally, I did say there was a whole new world version of Sapphire Steel, and this is the list. This is from Lamb Chops, also top 8 in the Charlie's Collectibles show, 13k, and very idiosyncratic list. This is a player we know, he's done very, very well with Sapphire Steel. Probably one of the best Sapphire Steel players in the world, and that means he can do crazy things like this list, because there's a lot going on here. It doesn't look like any of the other lists in Sapphire Steel that did well, and I think that's huge props to him for how he can pilot this deck, how he can build this deck. Things that are interesting in here really is nice to see Belle, Strange but Special, making a reappearance. Of course, she's a great lore generating engine. She can also be used to help you ink your cards and works really nicely with the Lucky Dime. We've got Miss Bianca in here as well. I think being able to get a 5/5 down on turn 4, very, very strong as well. But yeah, very, very interesting list. I'm sure you'll agree. So let's hop on over to the next most represented deck, which was Sapphire Ruby. So this was actually the list that took first place at the Charlie's Collectibles show. This was from Hector Harris, and it's kind of what I think is more of the control version. So you'll notice we don't have the big Tamatoas in this list. We don't have Lucky Dime in this list. It's very much about controlling your opponent's side of the board, and then really closing the game with your Maui Shark, being able to generate the lore from the actions, Pirate's Life as well. And yeah, it looks quite a lot like the lists from the previous set. Of course, we have got the inclusion of Tamatoa. I think most Sapphire lists indeed are going to be running him. It's such a great card advantage engine. And the Sapphire Coil as well to really synergize with your Medusas, with your Brawls, and so on. Next up, we have Hector's opponent from the finals of the Charlie's Collectibles show, 13k. This is a list from LOD Logan. And yeah, this is more the item heavy build of Sapphire Steel. Again, including things like the Lucky Dime, which is the main differentiator here. It's got the big Tamatoa as well. Of course, we see the small Tamatoa, and of course, lots of removal as well in terms of Sisu, Medusa, and Maleficent Dragon, just a couple of copies there as well. Scrooge McDuck in this list, so being able to get another character out for free, potentially by exerting your items. Very, very strong. And Cusco as well appearing in this list. There to help, I'm sure, in the mirror matches, being able to ink your opponent's Lucky Dimes, or even in those more aggro-oriented versions of Sapphire Steel, being able to get rid of McDuck mana. So very good list. Both of these doing super well and showing both sides of the archetype. And then just quickly looking at a couple of deck lists from the Rafle cast tournament. And this is a list from Toncoifeur BC. And the most notable thing here is the unconventional tool. This is a new item this set that allows you to pay 2 less for the next item you play when it's banished. So you can definitely see the line of playing Unconventional Tool on 1, banishing that to play Bell, and then being able to play the Sapphire Coil. So being able to get 5 inks worth of stuff out on turn 1, absolutely crazy if you're able to pull it off. But even so, it's an item that works really well with higher inflammation. We've seen how powerful it can be when you get things out for free or for cheaper. So definitely an interesting list. And the final Ruby Sapphire list we're going to take a look at. Again, many of the same things, more toward the control version here, but we still do see the Lucky Dime and the Tamatoa. But I wanted to highlight this one because it does include the new Kita card. First of all, she's Ward, which we know is going to be really powerful in these matches where your opponent's trying to Sapphire Coil you and things like that. But her ability being able to exert to ink a card and then put the other one on the top allows you to do some deck filtering and inking, which can be a super powerful ability. So I love this card. I think it's a really fun card. So happy to see her making an appearance in one of these decks. And before we move on, I just want to give a huge shout out to the sponsors of this video, Heavy Play. Heavy Play have their Equip Mag system that allows you to connect your deck box to your dice box and your playmat, all with the power of magnets, making it super easy to switch between tables when you play. They also have their curved sleeves with curved corners. It makes it even easier to shuffle, and you'll never have a card upside down in your deck again. If you want to get your hands on any Heavy Play products, you can visit heavyplay.com and use the discount code Inkborn10 at checkout to get 10% off your whole order. So thanks so much to Heavy Play for sponsoring this video. So the next most represented deck was Amethyst Steel, and we're looking at this deck list from Mitchell Shaler that was top 4 at the Safari Zone 3K. So anyone that's been playing Amethyst Steel, this is going to look quite familiar to you. Some notable things in this list, we do have the Queen. This is a new legendary card, this set that allows you to put 3 cards from your opponent's discard onto the bottom of their deck to gain some lore. So that's really great when there are a lot of decks that are looking to recur things like their items. The Queen is a great way to make it so that they can't get them quite as easily. So very interesting there. It's kind of like an alternate win condition and an alternate way to win some lore. We've also got I Find My Platinum there, of course, to help with all of those Ruby Sapphire and Sapphire Steel lists as well. We've also got 3 copies of Benja to do a similar job as well. And then the other thing that's notable about this list is a lot of these Amethyst Steel lists are just running the 4 strength for Raging Fire in terms of removal, but this list has 2 copies of Along Came Zeus as well as 3 Fire the Cannon, so making it a little bit more mid-rangey. But yeah, very interesting list. I'll be curious to see how Steel Amethyst continues to go as we go along. And the next most represented deck, also from top 4 at Safari Zone, this is John Vivorus's Emerald Steel discard list. Definitely building on the Emerald Steel archetype that we know and love. The main difference is here with set 7 is the inclusion of Pete, a really good card to be able to lock your opponent out of being able to sing songs and also giving you some resist on your Smees. After that, the list doesn't look like it's changed too much from the previous set, but it is a deck that's still doing pretty well, so it's good to see it popping up here. Next up, we have Ruby Amethyst. After so many sets of seeing Ruby Amethyst just all over the place, it's really interesting to see how much it's fallen off and also how different these lists are actually looking. So this is a top 4 list from the Charlie's Collectibles show from Zeke the Beast, and we can see here there's a definite heavy emphasis on locations here. One of the things we know in the current meta game with so much Sapphire Steel is they do struggle to deal with locations, especially those ones with the higher willpower. So it does make sense as a way for Ruby Amethyst to stay relevant, to put those problems that their opponents need to answer. After that, some new cards we're seeing in Ruby Amethyst this set is the Queen of Hearts, a 1/4 who gains 3 extra strength when she has damage on her, so it makes it very difficult for your opponent to get her off the board without having to swing 2 characters into her and probably losing the second character. After that, list is very similar to what we'd expect, and it's interesting to see the inclusion of Dragonfire too as a way to deal with the Maui Sharks, but also the Tamatoas, which is just so necessary in the current metagame. A maybe more traditional looking Ruby Amethyst list here. This is a top 8 deck list from Conflux Inkclash from Tom DG. Again, we see the inclusion of the Queen of Hearts, and also the Dragonfire. It's really interesting to see the Teeth and Ambition here. That's something that can be sung by the Queen of Hearts, put damage on her to make her even stronger, and then if your opponent wants to get her off the board, they have to swing into her. So very interesting list. I'll be curious to see how Ruby Amethyst does evolve with this metagame. Next up, this is the winning list from Conflux Inkclash. This is Amethyst Emerald discard from BP Dinu. Very interesting list and an archetype I think we're going to be seeing more of this set. We saw a few of these at the Charlie's Collectible Show, and it is a definite change from the Amethyst Emerald that we kind of know, the tempo version of the list. Instead, it's focusing more on the discard package. So we see 4 copies of Sudden Chill, 4 copies of Hypnotize in there as well. You've got the Prince Johns to really take advantage of that. And then after that, we're seeing the inclusion of Diablo again. Such a great draw engine in these types of decks. And because of that, we're also seeing the new Diablo as well. This is the Amethyst Emerald dual ink card. An evasive with challengers. And then also in this list, the Iago 4/6 evasive on 4 is definitely some crazy stats. So this is going to be an archetype to watch, I'm sure, as we move forward in the metagame. And then the last color pairing to make it into the top 8 of these events was Amber Steel, and more of the aggro Amber Steel rather than traditional Amber Steel lists. This is a top 8 deck list from Rafle from Hitsu, a name you might be familiar with, DLC winner. And yeah, looking very similar to what we'd expect for one of these lists. We've got the inclusion of the new Mulan in this list, helping you filter through your deck in the early game. Also Penny, who has a really powerful ability. She can heal up your Mr. Smee and give him resist to help him stick around for some more turns, because that really is critical in these lists. After that, much of what we'd expect. We've got the Rapunzels in there, the Baby Cinderellas, the Daisy Ducks. It's nice to see 4 copies of Sven. Sven is a card that I really like. He's great for protecting your characters like a Mr. Smee, but it can also let some of your other characters sing multiple times in a turn or quest and then sing. So very interesting list there. Did well enough to reach the top 8 as well. And then another top 8 list in Amber Steel. This is from Jatana Mutta, a friend of the channel, actually, a member of the Glimmerneers. So it's really awesome to see her deck list doing well here. And this is more of that diggy hole aggro kind of list with the 7 Dwarfs Mine Train, with the Happies and the Docks. We do see the inclusion of Bagheera, a card that I really like. He is, I do still think, quite a difficult one to play at the right time, because you don't want to just throw him down unless your opponent already has some damage on them. But definitely a fun card in this list. And there's also Jafar, who gives Challenger when he's played, who can help you beef up a character like Doc or Happy, who maybe aren't there necessarily as your heavy questers, but can be used there to kind of deal with your opponent's board if it gets out of hand. So great list and great job to Jetana. That is the metagame from the last weekend. It's definitely a wall of blue at the moment, but it's really exciting and nice to see that some other decks are still being able to hold their own. And actually, I love that we're seeing the development of new archetypes. Things like that Amethyst Emerald discard kind of archetype is really cool to see. So thank you so much for watching. I hope this video was helpful. If it was, please be sure to give us a like and subscribe for future content, including meta reports. A shout out again to the sponsor of this video, Heavy Play. If you want to check them out or get your hands on any Heavy Play products, you can use the discount code Inkborn10 at checkout at heavyplay.com. And of course, as always, a huge shout out to our YouTube members. We really appreciate you. If you would be interested in becoming a YouTube member or just want to find out more information, you can hit the join button down below to get all of the details and see what's on offer. And with that, until next time, happy questing.